Welcome to the Cafe Culture podcast, a season of discussions on culture, politics, philosophy and science.
At a talk recorded on the 7th of July 2014, Eileen Kaner discussed the consequences of heavy drinking.
Okay, well, hello everybody. I did not get an option as to whether I wanted my photograph or not. And if anybody saw that excruciating scene of me being photographed by the bar, I'm absolutely traumatised. A year ago when Lorraine asked if I would do a Cafe Culture, I thought Lorraine was somebody in my institute called Lorraine McSweeney. And I thought, oh, well, I'll have to help Lorraine McSweeney out. It was only 2 weeks ago that I realised I'd got a little bit mixed up there. And it wasn't the person I thought it was at all. In fact, the other person is actually highly diverted and very relieved that she's not organising this tonight. I'm wired up for sound and I'm not quite sure about my scope for movement, so we'll work that one through. Normally if people say to me, would you like to sort of stand up and talk to people about alcohol for 20 or 30 minutes? I'd be there like a shot because I work on this topic and I know a lot about it. But then when people say, would you like to talk with no slides for 20 or 30 minutes, most academics go into free fall. So what I did was I phoned two friends. So I've actually got with me Dr. Dorothy Newberry-Birch, who works in my team at Newcastle University, and is involved in a range of studies with me, but particularly has an interest around the criminal justice system and alcohol and its impact there. And Bridget Buick, who is from Leeds, so she's come all the way from Leeds tonight to see Newcastle on show, on our best behaviour. Bridget is a psychologist and does a lot of work looking at what we can do to try and help people who may be drinking too much, but has a particular expertise around digital interventions and electronic forms of intervention. And if I flounder, these two are going to kind of help me out just in case I freeze because of the camera, the microphone, and everything else. What I really want to do is, I guess, to pose the question, is alcohol a public health or a health priority? If this was a usual room, then 85 to 90% of us would be people who drink alcohol. So I'm not going to go too deep into your behavioural habits, whatever. But if you don't mind just putting your hands up and saying, in this room, if you drink alcohol, by and large as part of your lives, would you put your hand up? So pretty much the majority of people in the room, and that reflects society as well. So in the UK, which is often called a wet drinking culture, 85 to 90% of people in the UK drink alcohol. Most people drink alcohol and enjoy it. It's very much part of our social lives, it's part of our soap opera lives, it's part of sport, it's part of culture. The Prime Minister has had people around his millionaire club, and I guess wine was flowing then. So it's a very, very usual part of our day-to-day behaviour. And for much of the time, many of the people who drink alcohol only see the positive sides. And in fact, if I was to ask you about public health priorities, what do you think should be the number one public health priority in the UK?
Do I have to only pick one?
What do you think should be number one?
Smoking.
Yeah.
Alcohol would be very close behind that.
I'm preaching to the converted. Yes, so smoking, often people think, well, smoking is not good for people's health. We should be doing something about smoking. There's been a lot in the news just recently about levels of obesity. People generally think in public health terms we should be doing something about obesity. We know it costs the NHS a lot of money, and we know it actually complicates the operations people have, and there's lots of implications about that. Usually when you ask people about alcohol, they don't generally see it as something that really needs to be tackled because so many people use alcohol and use alcohol in a pleasurable way, and they generally focus on the positive sides. And I want to maybe try and just bring a little bit of information to see how we need to think about alcohol very much alongside some of the other big public health issues like smoking, like physical activity, like excess weight and obesity, and really have it in our frame of reference. When we think about the societal impact of alcohol, again, I want to just stray a little bit beyond the NHS and think about some of the other bits of society, particularly some of the other public sector services, and give you a little bit of a sense as to where alcohol finds its way into lots of people's list of things to do. And we'll maybe touch a little bit on what the country can do in terms of how to respond to alcohol issues. But if I'm out in the evening at a dinner party or whatever we do at night time, and people ask me what I do, the first thing, if I say, well, I work on alcohol and public health, well, it's a bit like telling a child there's no Father Christmas. People tend to find the fastest way out of a conversation with me because they think I'm going to start lecturing them or telling them that they shouldn't drink. So it's really a bit of a kind of social life killer. And so I thought, in order to try and get through some of the issues to do with alcohol, to bring some levity as well as some important points, I thought we'd go through a series of questions, a little bit of a quiz, get you to do some work. And then as I go through some of the answers to those questions, we can maybe expand on some of the issues that those questions raise for us. So I think lovely Dot has put some quiz questions on your table. You do not have to participate. This is an entirely voluntary activity. A pint of ordinary strength beer. We could have a conversation about what ordinary strength means. But it contains the same amount of alcohol as. And the options are 1 glass of wine, 1 double whiskey, or 2 pints of cider. And if you would just circle it, cross it, put a line through the answers you don't think are right, and just come up with the answer that you think is probably accurate.
Is it small, medium, or large glass of wine?
Well, let's go with a standard glass of wine that you'll get in a pub. And while you're answering that question, the last time I went into a pub and asked for a glass of wine, the person behind the bar said to me, would you like a large or a small? So I said, well, how big's your large? And they said 250 mils. So I said, well, how big's the small? And they said it was 175 mils. Now, a pub measure is usually, well, it was in the early 80s when I was growing up, about 125 mils in terms of the size. That's generally one of those little glasses you get free from Majestic. And now if you work into many of our homes, we've got these great big potties, these huge wine glasses, so it's kind of difficult to keep up with it. But essentially a standard glass that you would have, or a standard pub measure. Second question, Guinness is rich in iron. Do you think that's true or false? Well, and as you're answering the question, if I'll just tell you, when my mother was having her 3 daughters, she came from a generation where people were actively encouraged to have a glass of stout every day, stout or porter or Guinness, and that was for the iron-giving properties of those drinks. So, hello.
Apologies.
Come in and join us. Question 3. Can alcohol cause memory loss? Your options are yes, no, and I can't remember.
I don't remember the question.
Pardon? Oh, you may not. Do you want to join somebody at another table? Can alcohol cause memory loss?
Do you want to share this?
And don't worry, I'm not going to take marks at the end, so it's not a competition like that.
Do you like a pen?
So question 4. Sensible drinking limits. They're less for women than for men. And why would that be? Is it because women's brains are smaller than men's brains? Because women's bodies contain less water? Or because it's unfeminine to drink a lot? These are too easy. Question 5. I gave you the answer to this, or something close to the answer to this, in the little bit of stuff I did for this evening's event. On average, how much does the UK spend every year tackling alcohol problems? Is it £25 million? Is it £2.5 billion? Or is it £25 billion? Keeping us moving along and thinking a little bit closer to home. In the northeast particularly, how much do we spend every year responding to alcohol-related problems in this area that we live in? Would you say it's £1 billion a year, £2 billion a year, or £10 billion a year? Okay, thinking about the calories in alcohol, which of the following alcoholic drinks is lowest in calories? A glass of dry white wine, 125 mils, a vodka and orange, and half a pint of ordinary beer. That would be a 3 to 5% beer. I promise you I will not mark these.
About people cheating, looking it up on your telephone.
You can look up anything you like, anything on an app. If you can use that technology, you get with it and you do it. Question 8, I'm a complete Luddite. That's why I need Brigitte with me. Roughly, how many disease conditions does alcohol contribute? Is it 15, 30 or 60? Are you ready to go on? Penultimate question, question 9. There's been a survey done across 35 countries worldwide. And in this survey of 35 countries, where did England come in terms of the rates of self-reported drunkenness in 13-year-olds? Did we come first, 21st or 31st? And then the last question with a little bit of technical stuff in this one. What's the ratio between heavy drinkers and people who are alcohol dependent? These are in the old days what we used to call alcoholics, but what do you think the ratio is between the number of heavy drinkers and the number of alcohol dependent people that there are across the UK? Is it 10 to 1, 7 to 1 or 2 to 1? Right, I can see you've all worked really, really hard and we're going to have to get to the answers there. In terms of the first one, the pint of ordinary strength beer, in terms of units, what does it have the same amount of alcohol as? Does anybody want to shout out? Yep, a double whiskey. You're absolutely right in terms of thinking about this. Beer itself comes in a whole range of different strengths, and it comes in bottles, it comes in pints. So even saying ordinary strength beer is a bit of a difficulty. That's about 4 to 5%. But you know, beers now can go from anything from 3% way beyond 8%. You can buy it in a bottle, you can buy it in a can, you can buy it in a pint. But in general terms, most people who are drinking beer think it's a much less sort of strong thing, but you drink it in a larger volume. It's got the same number of units as a double whiskey. In terms of if Guinness is rich in iron, remember those mothers-to-be were all recommended to have a glass of porter every day. Do you think that's true or false? Mixed views? The answer is false. The quantity of iron that you can get out of Guinness is very, very low indeed. There are kind of Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries guidelines on what iron we might need a day. And if you were going to drink enough Guinness to get your recommended dosage of iron a day, for a man you'd have to drink 87 pints of Guinness. And for a woman you'd have to drink 148 pints of Guinness to be anywhere close to your recommended daily intake of iron. So essentially, it's false. It's not rich in iron, and it's not a good source of iron, and that the quantities you'd need to drink it to get your iron allowance, I think there'd be an awful lot of other consequences. So it's perhaps one we'll put on the heap.
Not from spinach either.
And not a lot from spinach, especially if you cook it.
No, it has the same as any other vegetable.
So in terms of alcohol causing memory loss, the answer yes, no, or can't remember. Yes. Alcohol can cause memory problems. If you drink alcohol rapidly, if you drink a lot in a short space of time, it can lead to very short-term difficulties in remembering what happened the night before. Intoxication can alter your recall, etc. But just as important, if you regularly drink too much alcohol, it can cause a deficiency of thiamine, and that can cause permanent brain damage. And for certainly people who are frequent and heavy drinkers throughout many years of life, there's something called Korsakoff syndrome, where you've got pretty significant brain damage because of the alcohol. So, and it comes through vitamin deficiency, and it's one of the things that GPs and other treatment providers need to think very carefully about when they're trying to help people who may be alcohol dependent. So yes, you've got temporary memory loss, you've got the permanent memory loss, and then you've got the just the sheer effect of intoxication. If you go out, drink at a high intensity fashion, and you're intoxicated or drunk, then actually that's a very sort of direct way of affecting people's judgment and also affecting their recall the next day. Sensible drinking limits, they're less for women than for men. Who thought it was A, because women's brains are smaller? You are a very good room of people. Who thought it was B, because women's bodies contain less water? That's absolutely the right answer, it is so. And also women's bodies contain a higher proportion of fat to water, and that has an impact on how we metabolize alcohol. So because women's bodies are smaller on average, and because we have less water and a higher proportion of fat, women feel the effects of alcohol more immediately and more readily than men do quite often. So women are more prone to things like liver disease and many of the other problems that you can get because of drinking. Nevertheless, in any time that you look at who's reporting alcohol-related problems, you always find the problems are reported much more frequently in men compared to women. And when you look at road accident statistics, 90% of people failing breath alcohol tests tend to be men rather than women. On average, how much does the UK spend tackling alcohol problems? I sort of gave you a clue in the trailer for tonight, although it's not exactly right. See, £25 billion every year we spend on alcohol. The range of estimates from the government and from NICE has ranged from 15 up to 55 billion. So 25 billion is the most up-to-date figure, and it's a safe average figure there. The NHS costs, which is where we think about first often, those costs are dwarfed in comparison with the costs of some of the other public sector services. So NHS costs are estimated to be about £2.5 billion every year, dealing with people who have alcohol-related problems in GP surgeries and hospitals, etc. The crime and disorder costs have been estimated to be £7 billion. And the lost days at work, occupational absenteeism figures have been estimated to be over £6 billion every year. When you add up the costs to the NHS, to crime, to education, to social services, to days lost at work, etc., the full bill comes to £25 billion every year that we spend in the UK. HM Revenue and Customs in 2010, they did a report to have a look at alcohol expenditure, and they found out that UK households spend about £15 billion every year on legitimate and recorded purchases of alcohol through supermarkets and other places. And they estimated that was about a fifth of the household food and drinks bill. So we spend about a fifth of our household weekly expenditure on alcohol in the UK overall. And it's very difficult to get the figures from the industry as to how much that they make in terms of profit. And the last time the industry disclosed those figures was in 1989. And in 1989, the alcohol producer industry reported that it made a profit of £30 billion each year. So if you sort of try and scale that up to 2014, we can imagine that's a lot larger now. So the industry obviously produces alcohol, it's legitimate, we buy it, many of us enjoy it. In 89 they made £30 billion in profit, but they do also contribute to the exchequer. It's about £9 billion, that contribution through tax and revenues, etc. But at this point, the country spends £25 billion trying to tackle a lot of the problems dealing with alcohol, and they don't really share much in the profits. They get the 9 million in through tax, but most of the rest of it goes into the producer industry because it's obviously got private shareholders, etc. So if you think about the bill for the country, it's a little bit sort of lopsided at the minute in terms of how much it costs the UK every year to respond to alcohol problems. Think about the North East. So how much do you think we spend in the North East? Well, actually, we only spend £1 billion. Now, in some respects, it is the case that the North East is one of the two heaviest drinking bits of England. The North East and the North West always come at the top when people are measuring how much people drink and how often, etc. But in terms of our geography and the size of the population, we've got one of the least populated bits of England. And so in the North East each year we spend £1 billion responding to alcohol-related problems. We spend, and these are figures that have come from Balance, so we've got the North East Alcohol Office is called Balance, and it estimates that in the North East we spend £264 million every year in NHS costs responding to alcohol-specific issues. We spend £296 million here in the North East, these are public sector costs, on crime and licensing. We spend £440 million in terms of, or we deal with that loss of productivity and absenteeism from work and other problems related to alcohol in the occupational sector. And we also spend £97 million every year in social service costs. So if we actually think about what we in the North East or what we in the UK do in terms of alcohol in these times of austerity, we spend a lot of money actually dealing with some of the aftermath and the problems that are associated with drinking. Balance have gone on and they've actually looked at the hospital admissions, and they've estimated that for hospital admissions that are specifically due to alcohol, so there's no doubt that that's the main reason, in the North East we spend about £12 per head of every patient in a GP's list. But in some of the more problematic areas, that cost goes up to £152 per every patient on a GP list in the North East of England. And if you add into that alcohol attributable reasons for going to hospital, so you can either go to hospital because you've drunk too much alcohol and you've got alcohol-related poisoning, or you could end up in A&E because you've had too much to drink and you were standing outside that pub and somebody hit you and you might find yourself in A&E, or you've fallen over or had some other accident in the home. So these are the kind of indirect reasons. And at that point it becomes £173 for every patient in a GP practice if you're in an average area. And that goes up to £173 per head of people on a GP list. So that's what we're spending dealing with alcohol problems in the local area. Back to a little bit more fun. In terms of alcoholic drinks, which of the three are lowest in calories? Was it the glass of dry wine, the vodka and orange, or the half pint of beer? Oh, you've been here before, Mark Shucksmith. That's got a slightly tricky question. In terms of the alcohol bit, vodka has the fewest calories. The 25ml shot of vodka gives you about 50 kilocalories. But if you add in the orange juice, it comes to 140 kilocalories, and that is the highest calorific load. So if it's just the vodka, that's the lowest in calories. But if you have the vodka and orange, it's the mixer. And sometimes the mixers, even the ones that feel a little bit virtuous, like a fresh orange, there's a lot of sugar and a lot of calories in that as well. Back to NHS things. How many diseases does alcohol contribute to? 60. In fact, it's over 60. Alcohol has been linked to over 60 specific disease or illness conditions. Heavy drinking adversely affects every single organ in the body. That's your skin, it's your brain, it's your liver, it's the whole lot. There is some evidence that very light drinkers are likely to die sort of a little bit earlier than people who are non-drinkers. So people talk a lot about the coronary protective effect of alcohol, and certainly the newspapers made quite a big thing about the fact that if you drink a little bit of alcohol, it's good for your heart, and people who drink a low level tend to die less early than people who drink no alcohol. The only problem with that is that when you ever talk to non-drinkers, you've got people who don't drink alcohol and have never drunk alcohol throughout all of their lives. And you've also got people who used to drink alcohol and have sometimes stopped because they've got bored of it, or sometimes they've stopped because for particular health reasons they've had to stop. So if you've got liver damage or kidney damage or mental health problems, some people then tend to stop drinking. So you also have what we call the sick quitters, people who stop drinking, who find themselves in that group of non-drinkers in these surveys. But I think the top and the bottom of it is that to get the coronary protective effect of alcohol, that tends to kick in for men over 55 and for women post-menopause. And it's at basically no more than 2 units a day. So it's a very low amount of alcohol, and it's certainly later in life. And before that point, the adverse effects of alcohol stack up and cause a lot more difficulties, and it's 61 disease conditions. And the other thing, there's been something slightly contentious in the local area. Has anybody seen any of the Balance adverts to do with alcohol and cancer? Probably like me, you don't have much time to watch the TV, or you only watch the recorded stuff. The local alcohol office brought out an advert trying to help people understand that alcohol can link to cancer. Alcohol and heavy drinking is responsible for 4% of all cancers that we have in the UK, and that's 12,500 cases every year. Nevertheless, there was a complaint made by, we weren't allowed to know until 2 months ago, by the producer industry, the beer and brewing and other producer people, because they felt that that was too extreme a campaign, and they actually raised a complaint about it. So Balance were not allowed to show the advert in the local area until they'd managed to successfully defend that complaint. But what they were doing is saying that the more alcohol you drink, the greater your risk is of developing cancers, but particularly of the gastrointestinal tract. And it's fairly obvious when you say it, but there is a very, very direct dose-response relationship. The more you drink, the higher risk is of alcohol of the entire gastrointestinal tract. That's the larynx, pharynx, throat, esophagus, all the solid state organs, and your lower gut as well. So it's pretty, because actually we drink alcohol and we're dosing all those membranes whenever we drink alcohol. Okay, question 9. I mentioned that survey of 35 different countries worldwide. In terms of 13-year-olds reporting the fact that they've been drunk, where do you think we came in that list? We came first. 28% of girls and 30% of boys aged 13 reported having been drunk 2 or more times in the last year. Top of all those 35 countries, it's not a good picture. By the age of 15, we were no longer top. We were 4th. But Wales was 2nd. So we were only talking about England, and England and Wales are both in this one. And if you look across all those statistics for the very young, what we find is that we have very, very high rates of beginning to drink and high rates of drunkenness in those young people who are drinking. There has been some good news over the last few years. There has been reported surveys that have shown that more young people are delaying when they first drink alcohol. So whereas on average at this time it was age 13, more young people are starting to delay that. But what we also know is that those young people who are drinking twice as much as they used to do. So we've got a kind of separating out of the population where young people are becoming a bit different, and many are delaying. We've got issues to do with cultural mix in the country, etc. But those young people who do drink, they drink early, they get drunk early, and that has a big impact on them for their later life. And then question 10, what was the ratio of heavy drinking, people who are drinking more than recommended limits, but certainly not needing to go to a treatment agency? What's the ratio of those heavy drinkers to alcohol-dependent people in the UK? Is it 10 to 1, 7 to 1, or 2 to 1? It's 7 to 1. In 2004, we had the very first National Alcohol Needs Assessment for in the UK by some colleagues of ours, and they estimated that 38% of men and 16% of women were hazardous drinkers. These are heavy drinkers, heavy regular drinkers, or harmful drinkers, people who've got early symptoms of raised blood pressure, depression, anxiety, all the other kind of things that can start to go wrong when you drink a lot, binge drinkers or dependent drinkers. But the proportion of people who are alcohol dependent was 1%. If you think about that in numbers, it estimated in 2004 that there were 8.2 million people who were drinking heavily or showing early symptoms, but not needing specialist treatment, compared to 1.1 million people who needed specialist alcohol treatment. And this presents, for public health people like me, a real paradox, and it's called the preventive paradox, because when you deal with individuals like GPs do, you deal on the basis of greatest need. And if you have somebody presenting to you in your practice who has had alcohol dependence, they've got very, very specific and very, very intense needs, and they need a lot of therapy, counselling, etc. But that GP is going to have, for every one alcohol-dependent person, 7 more people who are drinking at a rate that's affecting them. At work, it's affecting all their other disease conditions. They're part of the 70% of people in A&E between midnight and 5 a.m. who are there specifically because of alcohol. And it's those other people who are ratcheting up all the public sector costs and some of the other implications that I've been speaking to you. So in public health terms, it's actually most efficient to try to focus our efforts on people who are heavier drinking, binge drinking occasionally, the clientele that find themselves in A&E or coming into GPs with raised blood pressure but not knowing why, rather than actually only thinking about specialist treatment services for people who identify they've got a level of alcohol dependence. And I think that can be quite a hard message to convey to practitioners, because clearly they see people in front of them with very, very particular and severe needs. But as a country, we need to think about how we respond to the whole population. So bringing this right around, hopefully there's been a little bit of levity in there, a few facts, material of relevance to you. But in the UK each year, if we do nothing about alcohol-related problems, we know that we're going to have to spend £25 billion responding to it in terms of public sector costs. And many of those 13-year-olds who are reporting being drunk, these are the young people who've not got the experience to be able to manage their lives when they are intoxicated. They often don't have the resources, sometimes the money, to make sure that they don't find themselves at risk if they're out and in a public place drinking, and they have a vulnerability. And that can lead to unintended pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections, trauma. People can find themselves on the receiving end of a bottle and disfigured for the rest of their lives. And we've got to do something about all of those problems, as well as dealing with people with specific alcohol dependence needs. So I think I'm going to kind of just wrap that up there. Has anybody got any questions or anything that you want to ask me?
And we've got, as usual, we have a mic for that, so to ensure that everybody hears. So Lorraine's going to be our mic person for the evening. So if you put your hand up, make sure that the mic comes to you before asking you a question. Thanks very much. So I can see we've got one here and then over there.
Under 13, of the 13 drinkers, do we have numbers for male and female?
We did in that. Unexpectedly, in that international survey, we had slightly higher numbers of boys. It was about 30% of boys reporting being drunk, and it was about 26.8% of girls. Often what we find is that girls start drinking earlier than boys because they go through puberty sooner and they look older sooner. And in a lot of the work that I've done, we found higher rates of drinking earlier and heavier in the young girls that are drinking. One of the interesting things is I was asked to just talk about alcohol tonight, but sometimes the different lifestyle behaviours come together. So those young people who drink alcohol early tend to be the people who might be more likely to smoke. We also know that in our population we've got relatively high rates of overweight and obesity in young people. Over the last few years we've actually seen people presenting to our hospital services, particularly in Darlington, Durham, with end-stage liver disease aged 29. Now 10 years ago the average age of presentation with liver disease was in your 60s. It was a condition that you got later in life, and we've got people who've been presenting before they've hit their 30s. And it seems to be the case that we know that alcohol has an impact on the liver. What's less well known but becoming more known is that carrying excess fat has an impact on your liver, and that can challenge your liver separately. If you have two things together, if you're carrying extra weight going into puberty and you're drinking a lot, you have a multiplicative effect between the fat and the alcohol on the liver. And this is why we're seeing people present with liver damage at the point where it's irreparable, in their 20s, and finding their way into hospitals in the northeast, which is actually, really quite a profound thing. So the other thing about alcohol is it mixes together with all the other lifestyle behaviours and then becomes an even bigger, more compound problem. I mean, a lot of the work that my team does, and here at this point I want to bring Dorothy in, we're more focused on interventions, trying to look at things that we can do and see what impact it has on young people, old people, people with existing health conditions, pregnant women, etc. So we're very focused on interventions. The one thing I need to tell you that's not good news is that general education is not massively effective. So if you go into schools and just tell people they shouldn't be drinking, or you talk about drinking problems in general, a bit like me tonight, that's not very impactful in general, and it's certainly not impactful in schools with young people. And that's partly because most of us assume the problems are about other people, and it doesn't have much salience, it doesn't actually seem meaningful to the young people. But we've been doing some work led by Dorothy, where we've been working with 9 local schools, where we've been doing a little bit of lifestyle questions in a class, and through that process identified some young people who are drinking earlier or more than they should be, and seeing whether they are receptive to the idea of learning mentors, giving them a little bit more personal information, not just about the risks that they might be running if they are drinking, either alone or with friends, but some of the ways that they can reduce risk to try and promote their health or well-being. And I think that's quite obvious to me, but it can have some sensitivity to it, because some people just say, well, they shouldn't be drinking and you should just stop them from drinking. Well, I'm a mother of 4 and I've got two kids who are older teenagers, and alcohol's a reality in many young people's lives. If you are too draconian with your kids, a lot of them who decide to drink can often do it, but in hidden places away from the family situation. So it can go underground and risk can come from that. And if you're too lax, then the children are going to pick that up and they're going to kind of model from their parents, or even model from society, because let's face it, EastEnders, Coronation Street, Crossroads, they're all set around pubs. Oh, not Crossroads, sorry, Emmerdale. Emmerdale. They're all set around pubs. So, young people are actually just being acculturated in the world that we're in, and they're learning from the adults around them. So there's a little bit of modelling that's in there. General education, in the main, does very little good for young people, but actually trying to do more specific personal information where you're actually trying to help the young people understand their risk and how they might keep themselves safe. That's got a lot of opportunity to help. I think Dot wants to come in now.
I was just going to say, the other thing when you're talking about cultural change is that we know that most young people get their alcohol from their parents. And I think this is because parents are so worried And there's this idea that you have to teach your child how to drink because they're so worried because it's seen as something that they're going to do anyway. So I think we need to think about that really carefully. I think there's this fear that as long as they're not using drugs, it's okay. And because everybody can drink, and you know most people do drink, this idea that we've got to teach them. And I think it's a difference between teaching responsibly and teaching irresponsibly.
Is it illegal to give children under 16?
No, it's actually illegal to give a child under 5. After the age of 5, it is not illegal. Although a young person cannot go and buy their own alcohol in a public place until they're 18 or more. But it's an interesting one, that, because Dorothy and I did a review for the Department of Culture, Families and Schools. We were looking at the impact of alcohol on children and young people. And I've also chaired a NICE group, and in the NICE we tackled young people from age 10 upwards. But for the Department of Children, Culture and whatever it was, you know, we said to them, what age do you want us to consider this work from? And they said, well, you best do it from 5 because it's not illegal to give a child alcohol at age 6.
I've seen people give their 3-year-old alcohol and had to stop myself from going physically attacking her.
So we've had a few people who've had their hands up for a while, so over to you. And yeah, I've got you.
I'm not going to be taken wrongly with this question, which is a serious point and a trivial point. I do agree with what you're saying about the children, but I think there is some difference, which isn't my question. We can discuss afterwards about children in France. I do believe drink wine, don't they? Sort of as part of part of the thing, but those seem to end up like our children. But my actual question is relating to question 9. Is self-reporting drunkenness by 13-year-olds a very reliable method of estimating? Partly because I know some groups of children, for bravado reasons, will want to say, I drank a lot more than you did last time I got drunk. But related to another question, the trivial thing is, could they remember when they were asked the question?
The data in question 9 were taken from the Health Survey of Behaviour in Children. It's a great big WHO survey run over those 35 countries, and it's been running for quite a while. You're absolutely right. Self-reported behaviour has got some problems with it. But with alcohol, depending on how you ask the question, what assurances you can give people and the prompts that you can use to help with recall, it can be a reliable and a valid way of getting information about alcohol. Whenever I talk with GPs and we talk about adults, GPs always say to me, well, people will lie. Well, actually, particularly with adults, where it's been looked at their self-reported responses, and you've had some harder measure of consumption, like breath alcohol or whatever, depending on the question that you ask and how and etc., it can be a relatively accurate way of reporting. And the Health Survey of Behaviour in Children, it goes over a wide range of friends, personal relationships, bullying, smoking. There's quite a lot in there. So they don't go straight in and go for the booze, if you will. So I think it is regarded as a pretty top-notch source of data. But you're absolutely right. If I just sort of said to my 13-year-old, have you drunk alcohol? Well, you're going to get, a response of, of reaction and defence. But there are ways and means, and it's about the relationship you build up and the trust and the anonymity and how you're situated in amongst other questions. But going to your first point, and I know exactly what you're saying, and I spend a lot of time in France. This issue, though, of the French kids drinking wine and not ending up with the behavioural manifestations that we have in the UK, there's 2 bits to that. The French didn't used to have the disorder that we used to have, like the football hooliganism and stuff, although that is changing. But their rates of liver disease until the last 10 years were absolutely profoundly higher than the ones here. It depends on the sorts of problems you want to think about and put into the sorting hat, you see what I mean? But, liver disease rates in Mediterranean countries were absolutely, much, much higher than the liver disease rates that we had in the UK. The truth at the moment is that our liver disease rates have come from a low base and gone up. And in France and the rest of the world. They've been coming down and we've just met. So we're at a point of crossing now and we've just about met. But obviously I've told you a bit about the obesity bit of that thing. There's a lot of things going on there. But in my time in Mediterranean Europe, and particularly in France, there's a lot of anxiety in France and about their young people, particularly in more urbanised areas. But they now think that their young people are picking up the English disease. It's not what it used to be, which was a sexually transmitted disease, but they're actually worried about more binge drinking, more beer drinking, more drinking in public places around football and other kind of things. And there's been a few times now where there's been disorder in different European cities, and that's very much thought to be alcohol fueling that.
Cafe Culture North East is supported by Newcastle University, Peels and the British Science Association. We're also supported by Ginger's Cafe in Dance City, who host the events.